Hello everyone, I come to you from my bathroom where today I'd like to talk about flat ironing doll hair with an actual iron, an option for those of you who don't have access to a flat iron that you would normally use on human hair. And also I wanted to talk about doing ironing hair in general, especially synthetic fibers. So this is a penny, Felicity's horse, that I got ages ago with pretty matted up hair. So, let's talk about a few things while I'm waiting for the iron to kind of heat back up, and then I'll talk about what it looks like when your iron is too hot, which is always a dangerous point, and then this is the first time I've ever had that problem, actually, because it's not a flat iron where you don't have where you have, like, temperature settings. It just has, like, fabric settings, this big iron. And then I'll talk about some other stuff too. But why do we flat iron hair? What, like, makes the magic work? Because everybody will tell you, oh, you can just flat iron the hair, blah, 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 and then the crimps will go out. But why does that work? Well, this hair is plastic. It's not real, obviously. It's plastic fibers, and when we apply the correct amount of heat, which is more than a normal amount of, like, heat, but not too much, when we apply that correct amount of heat, we can very, like, briefly remelt the fibers and smooth them out. So a lot of these strands you can see, maybe not. But if you've ever seen a doll with like really matted up hair, you'll notice that their hair isn't like a straight line, it like zigzags all over the place. When we apply heat from a flat iron to that hair, it means that we have to briefly, very, very briefly, remelted the fibers so that they align more into a straight line. And it's not perfect. I'm sure that we all know it's not perfect. But it is that is the reason that flat ironing doll hair like works and that it's recommended as a treatment. I personally don't go to heat as my very first treatment, but it is like my second or third treatment. So I'm going to clear off some room for my laptop here. All right. So what do you need to do this exactly? The very first thing that you're going to need is water. I've been using this little cup for the horse's mane. I fill it up with water and then I get it wet like that. And that's been really helping with like not pouring water all over the horse. When you have a doll, it's a little bit easier, but I still would recommend trying your best to keep heat all the way on the hair and not on like the other parts. That's why I have this horse covered with a towel, which I do realize looks a little strange. All right, and then you need water, and you need to, before you apply any sort of heat, you need to make sure that the hair is fully wet. I'm not talking damp, I'm not talking misted, I fill this cup up completely with water, and I dunk the horse's hair in here, or whatever doll hair you're working with, whatever synthetic fibers. And then I have a washcloth with me to catch the drips, because when you do this, the hair will drip a little bit, and I mean, it's not a huge deal, but I don't want it getting all over the floor. So you can dab off the ends a little bit so that it doesn't drip a ton. Now, you want to make sure that your ironing device is on the lowest possible setting. Yes, I'm using a big old iron, but that's because I don't have a flat iron. What you really need is just some sort of piece of hot metal. If you were real old school, you might even be able to do like one of those old antique flat irons that you sit on the stove. That might almost be better because you could control the heat a little more. So, when your iron is too hot, this is where we run into problems. When your piece of heating machinery is too hot, it will melt the hair to where it breaks. So we want to melt the hair a little bit so that we can make it back into a straight line instead of going all over the place. But if we melt it too much, it's going to break apart completely. And that is where you get what my first mistake was. These are some little bits of synthetic hair fibers. I hope I can clean them out of this rag. Because I accidentally put this whole iron on its highest setting instead of its lowest setting, and then I just went at it, and I very quickly stopped. If that happens to you, do not worry. Stop as quickly as you can, get the hair wet again, and then probably even unplug the iron, because that heat is residual, so even if you are like moving a temperature dial down, it's going to take a little bit. So I completely unplugged my iron and I waited a bit, and then I could continue using it when it's got a little cooler. Normally I have flat iron doll hair with just bare iron and hair, but it is pretty advisable to try and use at least one protective layer, if not two. So you can see I have a t-shirt protecting like the horse's face and stuff. And then I have, I've been ironing on top of this rag, and I think I might switch to a different corner because this corner's getting a little wet. But I've been trying to sort of sandwich it in between some protective layers. All right, now when I go for this, sometimes you might hear just a little bit of like sizzling. That usually means, if you hear a lot of sizzling, that means your iron is too hot. If you hear a little bit of sizzling, that's okay, as long as you're fast with it. The reason I'm like sort of holding the iron on here is because I have like 2 protective layers, and I've been doing this a few times now, and I can see, all right, I've been working on this for a while, and there are some of these fibers that just are not being like corrected, which I guess is fine. With boiling, you can get to a certain point, but you're never gonna get it to look brand new. I'm also wondering if after it dries a little bit, the texture might be better. Or if this horse has always just had coarse hair. I think it has. I think these fibers aren't necessarily like the soft, smooth and silky fibers that we use on the AG horses nowadays, because I have Sparks Flying too, and that horse has very soft, very silky hair. This hair is a little coarser, and I can't tell if it's like meant to be that way. It might be because this horse, which is technically known as the Western horse, it's not technically named like Penny, Felicity's horse, but it was displayed with Penny, and so you'll find it listed under Penny as well. I think I'm gonna have to go on to something else for now, just so I don't go crazy. And like I said, I did slightly melt the ends, so I think that's where I'm getting the bad texture at the end from. Also, when I do this, sometimes I like to do at least 1 flat ironing on the back side of the hair. So if you have a horse, I flipped mine over, and then it didn't thankfully it didn't like hurt the hair. It didn't like permanently flip that way. It flipped back down. But if you're doing this on like a doll's head, you do want to try to get the back side at least once, because if you don't, it might you might have like a whole underlayer of fibers that haven't been heated. And also, okay, the reason we can't get to like perfectly new is because 1, we can't like individually melt each strand back to the way it was when it came out of the factory, and 2, is also just because you don't want to go too far. If you are at a good point, like this is a good stopping point. I'm not like super 100% satisfied with it, but I know that if I go further, and if I try to go hotter temperatures or keep ironing more, I risk ruining the hair even more than it already has been damaged. All right, I'm gonna pop back in here for one thing. So I accidentally burned some more hair. Again, that's like a bigger chunk this time. Oh, which I just got impatient, that's what happened. But here is a tip. If you need to get the hair off of the iron, which I've gotten most of it off, but you can see there's that little spot right there. If you need to get the hair off the iron, take a wet washcloth and just sort of rub your iron into it. Like this one is sopping wet, and yeah, the sizzling is there, but if you rub it into a wet washcloth, and then you should be able to then, it can take a little bit of strength to get the last bit of it out, but if you just rub it into a wet washcloth like this, you should be able to get 90% of it off. Yeah. That's just a pro tip. So what I'm gonna go to show you my sort of main method for this is the tail, which is my next goal. So here we go. I can now show you all, and there is a difference. There will be a difference in especially poofiness. So this mane is pretty matted. What I did a while ago, which I think I made a video on, I may not have posted it. What I did a while ago was I conditioned it to get the, to detangle it. So I used a tiny amount of human-sized conditioner. You do not need, okay, human shampoo is meant to remove oils from your hair. Plastic hair doesn't have any oil. So if you're using it, it's not really removing anything. Now, if you, the reason that I would use shampoo is if the doll's hair if the hair of the doll or whatever it was had actual dirt in it, like physical particles of dirt, you know, or was like actually dirty. Most of the matted doll hair I see is not actually dirty. It is simply very tangled. So I use conditioner for that because human conditioner is meant to like smooth, and when the hair is smoother, it can be brushed out a little easier. Now, whenever you shampoo the hair and brush it out all the way, it does become very poofy because all of the fibers have been damaged. So we're going to try our hardest to redo that. Now, I'm realizing I may want to do the tail last. I don't know. All right. I'm going to do the tail in sections, and here's my problem, is that I really need to lay it down. I don't have really the best counter space for this, but I'm going to try to lay the horse down for this, because if I try to do it like against the leg of the horse, I'm not going to really get a good thing. All right. Now, I wish that I knew what like an ideal temperature was for, I wish I knew what the ideal temperature was to like melt synthetic hair, but unfortunately there's not really any good resources on that. Because if we knew what the actual temperature was, then we could test that, and then we could sort of really get specific into like how hot is this iron going to be. But honestly, with temperature, I would go lowest setting, start on the lowest setting, and then, see, I'm about to increase the temperature on my iron a little bit, just a tiny bit. You want to be like, less is always more, and you can always increase the temperature and go at like little by little and go at it again. But if you start at like a really high temperature and then you like make a mistake and burn half the hair off, you can't really redo that. The tail is a little easier because the mane was hard because you have to do that like on the head. There's no way to really like lay it on. Unless you could MacGyver something where you like had the main part, like the little front part on a table and then the horse laying, but I didn't have the space for that. So this this iron was on like the very lowest setting, and I didn't really notice any difference. It's still really poofy. And this tail I'm doing by sections, and I'm also going to do it like multiple ways. So like this is the first way, but then I'll like turn the hair a little bit and do it the other way, because you want to try to get like a really even coating of this. So on this iron, this is like the minimum temperature setting, and I'm going a little bit above that because it's like barely hot. You want to make sure that the hair, like I said, is completely damp every time you go in for an ironing. And the reason that this is so important is because after you go at the hair once, it's going to get dry again. Like the water will evaporate that quickly. And so if you're not careful and you don't like redo it every single time, then you risk, of course, burning the hair. I think that is everything. If you have any questions about how all of this works, I know, let me talk more about like the fears of doing this. I know a lot of people are scared to do this, and you have many reasons to be scared. And of course, if this is like a precious childhood item, you will want to be very careful. Caution is key. It's all about how careful you are. Also, whenever you're going at this, I like to spread the hair out just a little bit. See, if it's like this, then I feel like it may not like distribute as well, versus if I like spread it out a little bit. That's just another tip to get like a really even heat distribution. So when you have a lower temperature like this and you're not hearing any sizzling, it can be acceptable to like leave the iron on for a little longer, because we're sort of playing like a go and slow game, you know. Also, it's a really good idea to understand how your flat iron works. Very, very good idea. If you are afraid of doing this, just know that like, if you're really afraid of burning off the hair, I would start at the very end, because if you burn off like a tiny chunk right here, nobody will notice. If you go and start here and down and then you burn it all off, that's a little more difficult to fix. If you're really scared, I would start with something a little less valuable. This was from a thrift store, and how much did I pay for Penny? It wasn't more than $20. And also, Penny is not a horse that like I've wanted for a while, so I would just be cognizant of that. Like, if you're really scared to do this, maybe don't take like your favorite doll ever, but maybe start with like another item that you have and then work from there. I also wouldn't recommend this on any hair that is not like very matted or very damaged. Some sizzling is acceptable. Like, sizzling does not automatically mean that you've burnt the hair, because the first thing that happens is that the water evaporates and then the hair starts to melt. But when you have a really high temperature, that happens really fast. But if you go sort of like quick, I would also advise to keep a brush on you at these times. You might discover new tangles like that you didn't get out last time. Or it's also helpful because sometimes like right after you finish this process, it can look a little different, and it'll always look different whenever it dries. So even if it's not like super perfect, after you're done, I would let everything dry and then evaluate. So see, when it's not very hot, I take my time on it, and what I'm really looking for is a change in texture. I don't think it's not going to become like magically perfectly straight, but I don't know if y'all can see that. I don't know if I want to bring my laptop over, but it's not becoming like magically perfectly straight, but it is being like less poofy, and that's what we want. If you have a section of hair that is not damaged, like the top half of this tail isn't really damaged because it's just the bottom half. That happens a lot with hair and stuff. Don't do the top half. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. All right. I have considered doing like an actual boil wash on a horse, like taking a pot of boiling water and dipping the hair in it, and that would work. It's just like I said, once again, these horses are they're bigger than you think they are, and the logistics of that are like, all right, I don't know if y'all can hear that, but we're getting some light sizzling. Light sizzling is okay. When you hear sizzling, finish up very fast because that means all the water on the hair is evaporating, which is not bad. It just means that you shouldn't, if you hear the sizzling, one, you should finish up and try to take the iron off as soon as possible. And two, it means that you need to re-wet the hair like I'm doing here. The key to not burning the hair is to keep the temperature low and the hair wet. Check the iron too, because I didn't realize I was burning the hair until I looked at the iron and saw little black bits on it. So check your ironing surface and make sure that you're not like just absolutely roasting the ends, because it could totally be, especially if you're like doing a bunch of this and you're like going through it, you might just get in the moment and then lose track of where you are. All right, there, finally, we're starting to see some results. So the temperature wasn't really at where it needed to be, and then I was like, oh gosh, it was like nothing was happening. So if nothing's happening, up the temperature just a little bit. Like, you can, at a safe temperature, you can flat iron without any sort of like protective layers. Like, I've been flat ironing with, I've been using like washcloths and putting the hair in between those, and that just helps a little bit. I'm not sure about applying heat protectant for like human hair. I don't think, I mean, it might work, but it's synthetic hair, and I think since we're ironing at such a low temperature and we're not going to like hundreds of degrees, I wouldn't personally do it. I feel like it's just kind of a bit of a waste of time. So you can go just on the bare hair. It all depends on how hot your iron is. The main key to doing this well is to just listen and be very observant. If you notice that the hair is starting to burn, stop. If you feel uncomfortable with how things are going, stop. And like I said, remember to brush it a little bit, because sometimes you won't even realize how it's not poofy anymore until you brush it and you're like, oh wow, that's a crazy difference. Also, these ends, you're gonna have a lot of like straggly ends. I think you should be perfectly fine cutting those off a little bit, of course, depending on your barbering skills. If you're doing like a doll's hair, maybe don't chop off like 2 inches or something, you know. But if you cut off those little scraggly ends, the hair that you're ironing can look a little neater. Look at that. That's not even poofy. Hopefully you can see that from like over here. So here I want to show what I will be and won't be flat ironing in this section, because you do want to try to like limit the amount that you're doing this. You don't want to just like go through the entire head if you don't have to. So I hope you can see this. Here, these strands look fine. These strands look like brand new or kind of used, but they're like perfectly fine. So I don't think I'm going to do this part to save time, to save energy. This part, on the other hand, you can see how it's like really poofy and sort of like stringy too. It like, if I push it all together, it doesn't really stay all together. This is what I'm going to be ironing. Thank you all so much for watching. If you have any more questions, head over to the American Girl subreddit, reddit.com/r/American Girl, all one word, no caps. Thank you.